Good. Welcome to another Thursday with Third Path webinar. We have been an amazing year of calls. Each Thursday webinar this year has been helping us think big about how we can create integrated careers for everyone, and so that we can support millennials to launch into an integrated career right from the start. And today's webinar will help us really underscore the opportunity of supporting millennials to think about these issues right from the start. And so we're having a little bit of background noise. If Sarah wants to mute herself, can. Then what you'll see in today's webinar is that we had an amazing event, our Pioneering Leaders Summit. We only have this event every 2 years, and we invite all the different professionals we've been working with who have been following an integrated career path to get together in one room and think about how they've been able to achieve what they've achieved and what next steps we can take to support others to follow in our footsteps. It was an amazing day, and to help us illustrate what happened during the day, I have a few of the people who were there to share some of their stories. Some longtime Third Path community members, some brand new Third Path community members. We're excited about making it something that everybody can learn from today. So, without further ado, some of the people who attended the event, like I mentioned, were long-term community members. And before I have them tell their stories, which will happen in a little bit, I wanted to give them a second to share a takeaway or what it felt like to be in a room full of men and women who really followed an integrated career and now were leading others to do the same. Roger, what was it like to be in that day of pioneering leaders, yourself included? And then I'll ask Brian, what was your big takeaway from the day?
For me, it was just really inspiring to come together with a lot of like-minded individuals. And from a day-to-day aspect of things, it's really hard to connect with or find other people doing similar things in different ways of really putting their life goals or family goals first, or how to balance that with their work goals in such a way that they don't have to necessarily give up on either. And it's becoming more common, but it's not that common. Whereas at the Pioneering Leaders Summit, it was just amazing. Like, everybody you talk to gets it.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Well said. And how about you, Brian? You've been such a pioneer for so many years. Look at your kids there, all grown up. What was it like to be in a room full of people who had followed the path that you were a pioneer around?
Well, I think very similar to Roger. It was quite inspiring to see so many people here. And it also, as far as we've come, it was also interesting to hear once again all the hurdles people go through. Since I'm past that role of having young children, I really want to make it possible for those who are starting families to be able to set themselves in a direction that allows them to experience the joys of parenthood, as well as, the experience of having a valuable career. Yeah. And so it was great to see all those people there focused on that.
Yeah, well said, well said. And we had such a nice big crew of men in the room, and I think that's a big message that we've always been talking about at Third Path. So I'm going to kind of do the speed version of what we talked about when we first opened up the summit. And what we talked about was the idea of something that we've always used as the mobile as an image to understand how you create an integrated career. And the idea that there's many different forces at work that can make it challenging for people to follow this integrated approach. And so as we go through some of the slides from the summit today, you'll see that we're going to touch on some of those factors to help us look at these issues kind of big picture. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about is how, yes, this summit looked at the new family stage, and we did that for a very purposeful reason. We wanted to be able to say, hey, if we can help someone launch into this idea right from the start, it will help them throughout their entire career. That's another thing we talk about at Third Path, is that this is something that can really help across the life cycle to learn how to do an integrated approach. And that in particular, when we're helping people think about how to balance work and family at the new family stage, there really, what we were trying to say was an opportunity to get every part of the equation think in a new and more progressive way around these issues. And that some of it's, thinking differently about how we do work and careers. Some of it's thinking differently about how we do family, and including how to make it affordable to redesign family. And some of it is around our organizations and what their norms are and how that's played out. So we've touched on all these issues over the course of the day. But when people are trying to think about how to balance work and family, all these factors come into play. And obviously, one big thing we talked about at the summit was how we need to help dads to really follow this integrated approach. And the big message was that it's not just what organizations are doing, but it's also what's happening at home. I know there's a lot of information on this slide, so I'm just going to touch on one thing, and then I'm going to go to the next slide, which kind of summarizes it pretty quickly. If you look at number 1, this is the idea that families are trying to figure out not just how to create time to care for their children, they're also trying to make sure that they are financially not putting themselves at risk. And unfortunately, how this often plays out in families is that they consciously or unconsciously protect one career. So maybe they'll let one person flex, but they're worried that if both will flex, that they will risk the possible financial consequences in their family. And so that's often a place where men end up not being able to be supported around change because there's some fears around both parents flexing. But hopefully what you're going to hear today will impress you that, hey, there's a bunch of people who've already broken down that model and are doing it in different ways. In short, when we talked about how do we support dads, we learned that it's a little bit about what's happening at work and a little bit about what's happening at home. And so obviously a supportive workplace makes a difference, but it turns out having a spouse or a partner who doesn't do gatekeeping and really supports men to make change is also a critical ingredient for really making these issues a men's and women's issue. And so we talked about how there's many ways to do family, and one of the big messages at the summit was that there are going to be always a diverse way that people set up family because people have different, what we call North Stars. Some are really interested in one idea, maybe making things very equal. Some are interested in something else. Maybe it's around parental care and wanting to make sure there's lots of time where their parents are involved with the kids. Some, it's about making sure both are able to earn money, both because they need it or because they also feel like it's a logical solution. We don't see a future where everybody does the same family solution, but we do see more men be involved with family and flexing like women. And so to get us going on this conversation, I'm going to have Roger and Brian share a little bit about their stories. We had many people speak up at the summit about how they had made these, put these ideas into action. So we're just narrowing it down to a couple of stories right now. And I've asked them to only tell a short story. But Roger, can you tell us a little bit about how you set up work and family in your life? And then I'll ask Brian afterwards.
Sure, thanks, Jessica. So for me and my wife, we have a 7-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. And when we were having the discussions about whether we even wanted to have kids or not, my wife, one of her hesitations with it was that she had a professional career as well as I did. And she did not want to give that up. She didn't want to be a stay-at-home parent, but she also didn't want to put her kids in daycare. And so in her mind, that meant there was no workable solution for this problem. But when she started to have that discussion with me, it was one of my early mentors when I first started working at Ford. She and her husband had come up with a solution where they both worked part-time and they were both home part of the day or part of the week, and then traded off with the other person. And so my mentor Kelly was doing that successfully, and that was probably like 8 years prior to this conversation happening. It was just one of those things that stuck in the back of my mind as, hey, that's a possibility. That's something that is out there. And so when my wife was starting to have those doubts or start to have that discussion with me, the first response back was, well, hey, why does it have to be this all or nothing approach? What about the possibility of us both flexing? This is something that's very much supported, something that's part of the HR policies, let's just both do this. We go both get on the reduced schedule and make it work this way. And so we started doing that when my son was born, and 7 years later now, I still am in the office 3 days a week. My wife is in the office 2 days a week, and we're home the other days. Often working part-time and working remotely via the world of IMs and emails and phones and such. But it's been fantastic. We've both been able to be there with our young kids and just see them grow and really embrace that and bond with them.
Wonderful. That's great. So that's what we're looking for, is the idea that men and women together can really think differently. And one of the things that really came out in the summit was how having somebody role model this for you makes a big difference in our ability to imagine what's possible. And having a supportive workplace that's letting you do these kinds of things makes a huge difference too. So thank you, Roger, for getting us started. And Brian, I'm going to have you tell your short story next. And one of the things I'm going to do is kind of make sure we can hear you guys loud and clear. So Brian, if I interrupt you at the beginning, it's because I need you to talk a little louder, but that might not be a problem. So go ahead, Brian.
Certainly, Jess. So I'll just start. My story begins way before we had children. I think, Lisa and I have always been very intentional about the way we move forward in life as much as we can be. So when we bought a house, I'll mention that we had decided that we wanted to live below our means, that we would buy a house that would be supported on one salary. The reason I bring that up is then 5 years later, when we decided to have children, we could have the flexibility of saying, hey, how do we want this to look after we have children? And my story is about, us deciding that we were both going to go part-time. We'd both have careers and we would both be fully involved in childcare. And the way we did that is both on 4-day work weeks. So there would be a daycare day, and then there'd be a daddy day, and then there'd be a daycare day, and then there'd be a mommy day, and then a daycare day. So, and then we'd be together on the weekends. And that really helped both of us learn how to be good parents and having to do it on our own and to feel comfortable. The other thing I'll quickly mention that I think was critical is we also, because of the financial flexibility, saved prior to having our first child, and I took a 3-month paternity leave. At that point, there was no paid paternity leave by our company, and I used the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, to take that time off. And I think that was also crucial in my getting involved and wanting to continue in that role as much as possible moving forward.
Yeah. In fact, both of you mentioned something that's really important, which is that having one way to really support dads to be involved at home is to have them really have time where they're in charge, where they have that daddy day, or they have had that time alone during paternity leave, or just period taking paternity leave. So that's something we'll circle back to. But a really important part of thinking in new ways about integrated careers, launching men and women into integrated careers during the new family stage, is to get parents to think about this as we can do this together. We both can develop our competencies to become parents, because I think you both would agree that when you become a new parent for the first time, you're both learning a lot. It's not something like either one of you had a lot of knowledge about, but you learn as you go, for sure, hopefully. So, wonderful. All right, so what we're going to do is keep on marching through a couple more ways we thought about these issues over the course of the summit. And the next one is to think a little bit about how there are some norms today around infant care that play out in a very gendered way. And so obviously, when we were at the summit, we were talking about, well, how do we start pushing back at these norms? What do we need to do to make some changes around this? And that typically what happens, and why we looked at the new parent stage in particular this summit, we had looked at the school age stage 2 years ago, and we wanted to build up our knowledge to look at the new parent stage this time. The reason we did that is because often when a baby is born, and actually it's even more typical when the second child is born, things fall out in a very gendered way. And this is in part because of just very strong norms at work and at home around who's supposed to do what, but in part it's also because there's real differences in what parents are looking for. So if you happen to be a parent, a family system where you really felt like you wanted to prioritize parental care, Typically, that falls out where the mom ends up being the one who stays home, as opposed to both parents being able to think about how they can flex. And so because of all these very strong norms around who does what at work and at home, it plays out in a very gendered way. But what Third Path has been doing is trying to say, hey, we can really do this differently. And when we help people think about how to do it differently right from the start, there are some real benefits, not just to families, but to organizations. And so the future we're trying to build at Third Path is one where we really encourage this more diverse solution. The one that's the least used now becomes the one that's more often the norm, where both men and women are supported when a new baby's coming to think about, hey, what would it look like to go to a 4-day work week for that first year or two, and making it very normal for men and women to do that. And we think that that will have many, many benefits for families, benefits for men, but interestingly, some really great benefits for the organization. In fact, one of my favorite moments at the summit was as only allowing a couple minutes to do it, we were going to talk about, well, why do organizations benefit from this approach where men and women both learn how to flex during the new parent stage? And the list just got longer and longer. People kept on sharing great reasons why organizations really benefit from this different approach, this integrated approach that both men and women take during the new parent stage. So again, we're doing the speed version of this, but if we wanted to step back and think about the morning conversation to begin with, Roger, what we've addressed so far, how do we support men to do this? Why do organizations benefit from this? What comes to your mind that were some important takeaways around the morning session, Roger? And then I'll ask you too, Brian.
I think one of the important takeaways for me was just the power of leading by example and having the open communication with your workplace as well as at home for some stuff things up. I know for me in particular, part of what even inspired me to be able to do this was the fact that my mentor, her husband, had done this. And so Kelly and her husband were already doing this, just even though it wasn't like I wasn't working with her directly at that point, just that knowledge that, hey, you know, this is something that is out there. I don't have to go chasing HR down trying to set up a policy. This is a policy. This is something that's available to everybody. Other aspects of this, I think that would be helpful is sometimes just education from human resources. Even though this was a policy, it is a policy at Ford, it's not that everybody really realized that it was open to everybody. And it's open to anybody to work reduced schedules, not even just for parenting as well. It's, you know, if you want to go on that, it's just a possibility for whatever your life goals are, or whatever your life needs are. And so just having some of that out there, and understandable that that's tough because there's all sorts of things you could say you need to have education around in policies at large organizations that you just can't get to all of them. But from a corporate standpoint, the benefits of it is just you keep talented employees that otherwise may leave the organization because they don't have that flexibility, or if a couple or family decides it's best to have somebody at home, one of the only options, if there isn't the flexibility, is that somebody stops working. And that's a huge loss to a company, especially once you've spent that time to train somebody up and get them knowledgeable about what it is they're doing and become the experts on that. Having 60% of somebody is much better than having 0% of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I think there's that also we were talking about that benefit that you both then become a team who can support each other. So if there's a sick child, both of you are equally equipped to kind of be there and think about, okay, what do you need to get done today at work? How do we make this work as a whole family system, as opposed to where it more typically happens, where the moms become the expert at home, the mom's the one who takes care of the sick kid. And so there's kind of a wider way to handle both the ups and downs that happen around the work side and the life side. And I think there's just so many benefits around that. And you mentioned that. You
Oh, go
mentioned a
ahead.
number of dads came and talked to you after you made this change too. So you became a role model for other dads, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first made this change, within the first year, I had four other dads come up to me and for various reasons asking about how to get this started. And they went on a reduced schedule afterwards. So that was really enlightening to me, just, how much people have the desire to do this type of thing, but just weren't quite sure that it was either a possibility for them or that they qualified for it, or, they were, some of them were nervous about, hey, how is this going to affect my career outlook if I do something like this? And that's also where the support from your local organization really matters. That if they support this and understand that, hey, you know what, we can still have a productive employee working reduced schedules, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're not committed to us. That's very powerful as well.
Yeah, we did talk about that there still are too many organizations out there who believe that commitment means more than full-time hours, working vacations, etc. And although some of our pioneering leaders made changes in those organizations too. Wonderful, Roger. I'm going to have Brian share what were some of your takeaways from the morning's discussion about how we can support more dads to do this. And again, thinking back now, Brian, I think we get a bigger perspective because we've been doing it for so many years, and that you don't have kids forever. So any thoughts you have about at this stage of your life, what it's like too?
Okay, well, I think I'm going to step back a little bit before then and simply say, as far as what an organization gains, which is what you mentioned earlier, I think that, too many times leaders and organizations become gatekeepers. And if they're not there, people wait for them. And I think being forced to be out or working a flexible schedule taught me how to be a much better delegator, how to be much better at empowering other members of the team to make decisions and go forward. And that allows a diversity of talent within your organization because people learn more things. You're not holding on to them. It helps them gain confidence. You see succession for if you decide to move on to another role. There are people who have done parts of your job just because you set the structure up so that they felt confident being able to do that. So I think that's a huge benefit to the organization. I think to support the dads who want to do that, parental leave, I think, is critical because those early years are important. And just, as you've already mentioned, having role models and people being able to see that if you're out for 2 months or 3 months, it's not the end of the world. One of the most surprising things is when I would come back from a paternity leave, people would go, "You're back already?" It was a blip in time to them, and it was a huge experience to me.
Yeah. In fact, you're reminding me, your story includes one other of the many benefits of this model where you and Lisa really became a team at home, thinking ahead about what do you want to do with life. And one of those amazing things you guys did together was to say, hey, let's go on a big trip as a family. And remind me how long that trip was, because you had that same reaction when you kind of set it up. People were really surprised that you were back so quickly. What did you guys do together as a family there?
Yeah, so we each took a leave of absence, and we traveled through Alaska and the national parks. We started our family reunion on the East Coast. So I think it was about 2 months that we were out of work, taking this trip and just spending time together when the kids were old enough to appreciate it. So it's a very different stage of life. And they enjoyed it and we enjoyed it, and it really brought us together.
Yeah. And again, not because the new family stage is the only stage we need to think about it, but what Brian's helping us think about is when you launch into this with parental leave, you start learning some skills, including how to work together as a team at home. And then those very important points he said as an integrated leader, how he really relied on a team at work too, and how everybody benefits from that approach at the workplace. So wonderful. So again, what we're looking at is the many different forces that can kind of influence why someone can launch into an integrated career. We've been focusing on the family side of things. In a second, we're going to be looking at the organizational side of things. But before we get there, I want to make sure the people who are listening in today understand this is bigger than just parents. This is across the life cycle. Some people become parents, about 80% of us, but 20% of us don't. And this is an issue that needs to be inclusive of everybody. So we're going to talk a little about that in a second and get Sarah to share some of her thoughts, partly because Sarah's been a really wonderful aunt to her nieces and nephews and very involved in our family that way, but also because all of us will probably be dealing with elder care issues over time, and they can happen in a very unexpected way. So I'm going to get Sarah to talk a little about how she's been involved with these issues, both as a manager and personally. So welcome, Sarah. I'm so glad you're here. I know you couldn't make it that day, but we've been involved in thinking about these issues for a while. What resonated so far? Why are these issues important to you? And how have they played out in the work or at home for you?
So I think it's really important because I feel like when you're, for an average person, when you're at work, you're thinking about home, and when you're at home, you're thinking about work. If you haven't prefaced any of that with, like, here's my plan. So if you don't come in with a plan or, some kind of something, or you're at a new job and you don't know what everyone else is doing, then you tend to spend your time, you already know, whether it's conscious or unconscious, you already know that you're sharing your life between work and home. And I just feel like this whole idea of getting it set up in advance, per se, or talking to people who are going through the same things as you are, is just a really helpful tool to have. And me, we've taken a path where we aren't raising children, but there's a lot of the same issues, just not even insert another thing or person that we have to care for, but the issues are the same as far as finding time to just regroup after, doing a big project. I mean, it's all communication. And so I think there's a lot of things where it's deeply important for families and parents to, understand this. It really is important for everyone to kind of have this model in their head.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I hear you talking about is a word that came up over and over again, is being intentional. Whether or not you have kids, being intentional about how do you want to think about these things. And communication, you're so right. It's communication at home with your partner, whether or not you have kids. It's communication at work. I remember a long, long time ago, you and I thinking about the goal of how do you turn off work on vacation. And I remember you had an aha moment where you were like, hey, I've got to think about this for myself as the leader, not just for the people I'm managing. I need to think about how to really, learn how to turn off work on my vacations too. And again, that idea that if we model this as leaders, that we have whole lives, it gives the green light to everybody else to think about this too.
Right.
I'm going to put up one more slide about that, kind of summarize these things, and then ask if you have another thought or two, Sarah, as well. One of the things that we talked about also is that you have, although your mom's, I wouldn't call it elder yet, you've been dealing with some unexpected issues around care for your mom. The big point being unpredictable. You want to share a little bit about what you've been learning around kind of the unpredictableness of as our parents age, what happens? Is that cool to share some of that story?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So the current situation is my mom, who is, very healthy, 77, or I should say was, had a hernia operation, and just a lot of her complications are from being under anesthesia for so long and not so much. She was healthy enough to have the operation at her age, and, it was just supposed to be like a normal recuperation period, and there's just all these other things that have just flown into it, that now she is on oxygen and dealing with blood clots and things that will all repair themselves. But, my father passed away 5 years ago, so she lives by herself. She is, stubborn, which stubborn is the wrong word. She's independent. But there are things that she needs to let go of, and it's really hard for us. I have 3 brothers, I have a brother and 2 sisters, to be telling her, Mom, you need to do this. You need to do this, Mom. I mean, of course, we're in our 40s, and it's not like we call her up and ask her to help us with basic things. We're running our own lives. But so it's not a complete 180. The tables are turned. We're just all kind of, but she's now the person that she needs some guidance in. She's just making some decisions that aren't right. And anyway, we're much more involved in like how her health is and what she's doing at home and what she's still doing herself. And it's just been like hard conversations to have with her.
Yeah.
And, she's been kind of a pill about it. But at the same time, like, I truly believe in the fact that there's wisdom and there's respect to, our elders. And so I don't want to be someone who is just like shuffling a mom around, do what your kids say. I want her to be involved in her decision. But you got to walk that fine, and that's what we're dealing with now, because we need her to make some big decisions. And she's like blowing us off, and she's just like, it's funny.
Yeah. So welcome to the world of aging parents. And again, I think that the big message of the summit was let's launch people into an integrated approach as quickly as we can, because they're going to use these integration skills across the life cycle. And that's something I've really learned now that Third Path is 16 years old. I've seen it in my own life. Something that I was doing in the new parent stage then became slightly different as my kids got older, and now we've been dealing with elder care issues too, and they're so unpredictable. So we kind of concluded that morning session with some rules for the future. Families are diverse, that families keep on changing, that many of us are parents, and that if you are a parent, creating a team at home to help you manage these work and family issues really makes a big difference. But truthfully, this is an issue that all professionals need to learn about, and they need to look for these triple win solutions. We called it a triple win when someone found a way to flex that was good for them, good for getting their work done, and here's the third one, an important one, good for their colleagues and clients. And so we're hearing from the different people who had really created these triple win solutions. And here's the kicker. They also got really smart about setting limits around how much work they could handle. Because one of the big things we talked about is, especially in the new parent stage, we can be tired. It's just, you don't get a good night's sleep. It's a lot going on. And so one of the things you hear in Roger's and Brian's stories is that they created time as a family to manage that stage well and enjoy that stage, as opposed to just being exhausted by that stage. And that what we were saying was, as people follow this integrated approach, we are shaping what we call whole life leaders. Leaders who really understand that they can be an excellent leader and have time for their life outside of work. And as you've been hearing from Roger and from Brian and from Sarah, it really turns out this is good for the organization too. So, David, you were brand new to the summit experience, pretty darn new to the whole Third Path experience. I kind of tried to take you up a quick learning curve of some of the different ways we look at things. And I'm wondering, as someone who is brand new to this and sat through the summit, luckily you have a leader who really does believe in these issues, is trying to figure out some of these things himself for his organization. What was it like to be kind of brought into this community that's thinking so differently than probably what you've seen elsewhere? Tell us, David, I'm curious.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and actually thank you for actually bringing me into the community, because it has been a lot of fun. It's been a pleasant surprise, and you're right, our leader at my company, Stephen, is really looking into how we can get that win-win from everyone and get people to look at things a little bit differently. And it's been, I think the summit was really a great day. There were several takeaways I had from that, but someone in the summit early on said that it was just so great to have so many like-minded people in the room, that are geared towards the goals that Third Path is trying to reach, and also just so many smart and driven. And I feel like one of the words of the day was intentional. There were people who wanted to be very intentional about their careers and their family and their lives, and that was a great takeaway. It was energizing, it was fun, and it was really a thought leadership forum. I thought it was there were several fantastic takeaways from that. One of my favorite parts was the walk we did in the afternoon. I had a great walk with Judy, who works down in Florida with Disney, and it's refreshing to have people that are in the same boat as you, and it makes you feel like this isn't an uphill struggle by yourself. Quick background on me: I have a 3.5-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old son. My wife and I both work full time, but I've been able to work from home 2 days a week, Thursdays and Fridays. Most weeks I'm able to do that. So we're able to split some duties when I'm home. My wife can go for a run in the morning, and I can get the kids ready and out to school and to daycare. So it's been really great. And another takeaway was a big takeaway is having the an employer buy in. If an employer does buy in and has you turn off your phone on vacation, or sees the benefits of being able to work from home, I think that's been really great. And then one other takeaway that a young lady mentioned, that as a parent of young kids, she does something that my wife and I try and do, that we each get a night out or a night away, and whether that's just going to Home Depot for a few hours by yourself,
Yep.
or playing basketball, or seeing some friends, and then she'll go out to dinner with her mom or get her nails done or something. It is just really refreshing to be able to look forward to that.
Yeah.
So it was really great.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm so glad it worked for you. And again, that's really good news for us, because we are encouraging people to think very differently, both that men really want to be involved with families just like women, and that work can be done in a very different way, where we actually have time and energy for our lives, and how much organizations really benefit when we do it that way. So I'm so glad that all of that really came loud and clear. And you're right, intentionality. Probably what we're learning even, it's intentionality for the person, intentionality for the family, and intentionality for the organization. And that's what we're going to switch to next, is kind of look a little bit about what we talked about around what organizations can be doing to make some changes around this. So again, to create an integrated career, there are many forces that are at work, and now we're going to switch to thinking about what happens on the organizational side. Again, I'm going to do some very quick presentation of some of the slides we looked at. Then I'll get Roger and Brian to share some thoughts, and then I'll get David and Sarah to share some thoughts. And if we have time, some of you. So again, one of the big important messages is that there really is a different way to do work depending on the type of job you do. So not all jobs can be flexed in the same way, and that's a basic tenet of what we teach people. You need to look at the kind of work you're doing and look for the right kind of flex for that type of work. But the other big thing, I apologize for all the little pinks and blues on this slide, but we're trying to communicate an important message here, is that professionals are managing their careers over time. And there's some pretty strong cultural norms out there around what happens to them when they're in a certain workplace. And one workplace we talked about is a work-first workplace, where really the expectation is that you need to put work first your entire career. And that's what's modeled by the people at the very top of the organization. And so they're sending a very loud message to everybody else. Hey, if you want to be taken seriously here, you've got to put work first. And unfortunately, what that means is that, as you can see, over time, just because the way gender plays out in our world, more women end up leaving that workplace. More men end up being the leaders of that workplace. And I'm not even saying that's what everybody wants. I think some of those top leaders probably feel a little boxed in with the choices that they had to make. And so what we're trying to do is help people think about an integrated approach. We call them the purple people. So they're the people who, maybe some of them even entered the workplace really wanting to follow a more integrated approach. But unfortunately, in these work-first workplaces, it's pretty hard to get to the top on that integrated approach. The cool thing that we've been working on for the last 16 years is finding some people who are pushing up against that very top and making some changes. And some of them were at our summit It was really fun to hear them talk about the ways that they are even influencing change in their work-first work cultures and moving into those higher positions of leadership. But there were some other work cultures we talked about. One was a very important one called a partially flexible work culture, where there's a little subgroup inside of an organization doing things differently, and they're making that pocket of change. This is a very important group because we can see how that subgroup is influencing wider change around them, and we had some of those leaders at the summit as well. And what we talked about is, unfortunately, in these work-first work cultures, or cultures that really reward people who put work first their entire careers, there are some challenges. It becomes normal for people to be available 24/7. It becomes normal for people to work in the evenings and on weekends. It becomes normal for people to work on vacations. And what we've seen is it actually probably increases the probability of chronic overwork. And again, I know I'm going through some slides pretty quickly, but the idea is that we talked about this. There's some real problems when organizations are in a chronic overwork mode, where there's never a break. You're just going from one big project to the next big project to the next big project, is that you can actually create a culture of fire drills where people have a very hard time knowing what's their most important work. And people who try to set boundaries feel like they're actually looked at wrong and as a problem, versus what we're calling a strategically flexible work culture. And that's the beauty of what's been happening over the last 16 years with Third Path, is we've really found these very fully flexible, strategically flexible work cultures. People who purposely built their organizations to support people to follow an integrated approach across their careers. And they're not saying it's been easy, but what we can see is that they're supporting people to learn how to do integration. So more people become purple people in these organizations. And even if they don't make it to the top and they move somewhere else to work, they take those skills with them. So there's a lot of benefits from these strategically flexible work cultures, and we had some of those leaders represented as well. And what we see is that these work cultures basically have gotten smarter around managing this problem of chronic overwork too. And so we're seeing that there's some benefits. These work cultures have gotten smarter about how much work can we really handle. They've gotten smarter that slower period of work, that valley in between the peak periods of work, is as important as those peak periods, because it lets us recharge. It lets us think about how to reprioritize our work or start delegating some work that we should be delegating but haven't had time to do before then. So it turns out that there's this real benefit for organizations to think about how to do work differently around how we can avoid chronic overwork and how we can work smarter. And that we really had a lot of these leaders in the room with us talking about that. And some who were still in these really difficult work-first work cultures, but still pushing for change in them. So let me explain this slide for a second, and then I'm going to get Roger and Brian to talk about this. What we're saying is that in order for to become this strategically flexible workplace, or to be strategically flexible in general, you need to think not just about flexibility, changing where and when we work. You also need to think about capacity management, how much we work. And it's putting those two things together that actually allows us to work smarter. So too many of us are in work cultures in that first column where nobody's thinking about capacity management. If you look at that top left box, there are work cultures that support you to work flexibly, but they don't care if you're working 70 hours a week, which is still a problem. And then there are work cultures in that bottom left box where they don't really let you work flexibly, and they still are asking you to work a lot of hours. And we had some leaders from there too. So what we've learned as a group, and what I was excited to hear people talk about for the first time, was yes, flexibility is important, but it's also really getting smart at a personal, team, and group level around how to think about capacity management. That was music to my ears, to have a group of really smart people thinking about what do we need to do to get smarter around capacity management. So you guys are these leaders. You saw these leaders. We had a rich discussion about how work culture influences all these things. Roger, what were some takeaways around either about capacity management, around work culture, what a person can do, what an organization can do? And then I'll ask Brian.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, from a personal and organization standpoint, I think one of the keys to capacity management is just open, honest communication from both sides. One of the things that's really helping me out moving on to a reduced schedule was just very, very clearly setting boundaries with my local management and my colleagues about when I was available, when I wasn't available. Some of that was done through on my calendar, just blocking off time slots that I'm just not going to be available for a meeting. If you try to schedule a meeting for there during that time, I'll just decline it. That really helped out just from a standpoint of people know what to expect of that. And so what it does end up creating for myself is a lot more meetings on the days I am in the office. With that as well, though, I do have a lot of flexibility built in where if I am at home, I may not be able to meet with you, or I'm not going to necessarily want to sign up for an hour-long meeting with you if I've got to be taking care of my 3-year-old daughter at that moment. But if you send me an IM, I might be able to get back to you somewhat quickly, or if you're sending me a text on that time. And so some of that is just setting up those expectations with colleagues about what is something that I can respond to or will be willing to respond to. And with that as well, I'm not necessarily going to respond. If you're sending me a text at 8 o'clock at night or outside my general working hours, if it's really, really important, maybe I'll get back to you. If not, probably the next day. It's setting those expectations up early with that, I think, is pretty important. But then also from an organizational standpoint is respecting those boundaries and realizing that people's entire lives aren't just dedicated to work. There are other things that are important to people. And for myself, everybody has very much respected that. I've talked about having the ability to do IMs or emails or texts from home, but even with that, I think out of the 7 years I've been working this schedule, I've had maybe 2 phone calls from my boss outside of my days at home. They really don't like to bug me on those days. They understand how they're important. And so when they do get those calls, I know they're important.
Yeah. In fact, I think what I heard you say was it really helped you kind of get smarter about how you approach your work, and you've been actually rewarded and promoted in this approach that you've been taking too. So lots of good benefits there. How about you, Brian? You've been practicing this approach for a long time too. What are some lessons you learned from that day, or lessons you've learned from your own experiences about what organizations or individuals need to be thinking around these issues?
Okay, Jess. I think one of the things I appreciated was the fact that you were bringing in capacity management into the equation, because I think many companies think of flexibility as more. Gee, if I allow my employees to flex, then I can get them working nights and weekends as well. And that's not what it's about. So I really appreciate you saying that. I think chronic overwork is a problem. I think that setting limits, as Roger said, is very important. I had a boss who once said, oh, gee, at our level, we don't take vacations, we read email from another location. And I pushed back and said, I don't do that. And then probably about 9 months later, I ended up leaving the organization. Don't know whether that was, a learning experience for him, but I think to be very strategic and understand where you add value to an organization allows you to push back. And I think we need more leaders to both push back and to give examples for people as to that it's okay to do that. Say, here's when I'm going to be working and I'm going to be very focused, and here's the value I add, and that's what I'm going to be working on during that time. And to have the downtimes that less is more, not, flex gets more, more out of an employee.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm watching the clock and realizing, speaking of boundary setting, we have about 3 minutes before we have to let you go. So I'm going to put up one more slide. I'm going to show you where we're going. Then I'm going to get your last thought, just in case we have to let you go before then. is that, we're going to hear from Sarah and David about these issues, and then we're going to ask the wider community listening in if they have a thought that they want to share or a question they want to ask. So that's where we're going next, is just kind of summing up what we learned that day, that, both we need to be thinking about changes at home, thinking about new roles for men, thinking about new kinds of organizations that are using this term capacity management, and that there's actually some benefits to setting boundaries. So maybe before we hear from Sarah and David and their thoughts, what's one big wish you have, Brian, when you think ahead? We've been at this together for a long time. What do you hope for millennials? What do you hope for the next generation around some of this? And then I'll get back to Sarah and David, and you can take off if you need to.
Okay, it's very simple, and it's not for everyone, but for those millennials who want to have a more shared approach and have both career and home, that their organizations are able to support that, from paternity leaves and maternity leaves to flexible schedules, meaning part-time schedules, and the ability to have boundaries, because it's a very satisfying life if you can find organizations or make organizations that allow you to practice that.
Yeah, wonderful. So there really is some answers out there for you millennials, people who follow this path ahead of you. And there are a growing number of organizations that were represented at this summit who are really supporting people to do it from start to finish. So thank you for being here, Brian. I know if you might have to step off, and I really appreciate you being here today.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. I will step off.
Okay, great. Great. So
Bye.
Sarah, you weren't there that day. I'm going to get your thoughts about what you've heard so far. But David, before we hear from Sarah, when you heard us talking about capacity management and chronic overwork, and the idea that maybe there actually are some benefits to organizations to set limits, that's a wild way to think about things. What would you say? And we are going to wrap the call in about 4 minutes, so we will be wrapping up soon. But what did you take away from all that discussion, David?
Sure. I think one of the big takeaways was one of the discussion topics that I did not partake in, but it was just having what is considered to be the tough conversation, or the conversation you think is going to be tough or perceived to be tough, when in actuality, if you lay it out very specifically and choose to have the talk with someone who you might report to, or your boss, or even someone higher in the organization, if you go in prepared and lay out a game plan, it's not a difficult conversation, really, or it's less difficult than you might imagine it to be, put it that way.
Yeah.
So if you're specific about your intent and where you want to go with things, I think, it makes it much better for everyone going into the conversation. Roger made a great point about setting boundaries on availability, and yeah, absolutely, I think that's a great approach. And then Brian, said something that about not being available on vacation, and that I think that's really important too. And that just made me cringe when he said that his boss said we don't take vacations, we check email from somewhere else. That's just I would probably be ending up the same way he did in leading that organization as well.
Yeah. So you're right. I'm so glad your brain went there, David. It was a courageous conversations.
That's it. Yes.
Yep. And that is what we've learned, is that there are people in every type of organization who've been making changes around this, and they've had these courageous conversations, and sometimes really been able to make a powerful change happen, because I was one of the people I was talking to was a woman who was thinking about talking to her boss, because she could see that he wasn't intentionally creating chronic overwork. That wasn't his goal, but he was creating it in his behaviors, and that there were actually some really big downsides for the organization for his approach that wasn't even very intentional. So she really was empowered by the day to kind of go back and have that personal conversation with him about, hey, this is what I observe. Here's what's going on. I think we could make some changes here that would really benefit everybody. So thank you for pointing out courageous conversations as a way to make change. Sarah, you weren't able to be there that day. Anything that you've heard so far that really struck a chord for you? And then I'm going to explain who's in those pictures in the top right corner, and then we'll probably wrap up in a second.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it because I know I would have just digested all of this, or ingested it very well. But I'm also glad that you kind of brought capacity management into it, because that is a big piece of it. And I mean, really, that whole individual approach and then to company approach is also the usual cycle of somebody's career as well. Like first you're just a staff person, and then you move on, and as you move up you become a leader and you care about the company, and you don't really want the company to fail either. And so you can't really have conversations without thinking of the effect on, so everyone can individually go to the boss and be like, here's my schedule, and this is going to work for me, and I can get my work done here and all of that. And that's great, but the boss has to sit there and look at the 8 people that he hired and see, is this still going to cover the the thing, or do I need to recruit more people, or is this math going to work? So capacity management is a big piece of it, and I think that's really, honestly, I feel like if you had this seminar or something like this and it was all leaders of the organization, that would be what they would be focused on. Not that so-and-so wants to work from home because they have little kids. Like everyone, I feel like having a kid is a golden ticket anyway. You usually get, people are, to me, I have always found that people are very supportive when there's a family responsibility outside of work or whatever, and you may still lead with that monkey on your back. But I think that companies are trying to do it. I mean, I'm in public, and so maybe a little less, but still, I think that if you had a room full of business owners, capacity management is going to be their big point. And so I think it only makes sense that this also looks at that.
Yeah, and I think what we've been learning over 16 years is that with this change in technology, changes around people's roles at work and at home, that there really is this problem of chronic overwork now. And what we've really seen, and this is the big takeaway, that when you really support somebody to think about following an integrated career, you're developing their skills to be smart around capacity management, which means you're developing the organization's knowledge and ability to think better about capacity management. Just like Sarah said, because they progress over the course of their careers and really can become those leaders who help the organization think about it. Well, like I predicted, we aren't going to have time to talk about some of the afternoon table topics that we did. They were pretty wonderful. But that, there were some big takeaways from the summit. I am going to stick around after I hit the recording button and answer questions. Maybe some of the other people can stick around and answer questions too. But it was really a day where we learned very powerful things, and we will have it again in 2 years. So if you know some amazing progressive leader who's followed this integrated approach, get them in touch with us. We want to include them in this pioneering community and have them share their wisdom with us and share across the group so we can all learn together. There also are ways that you can stay involved yourselves with some of our work. We have a great group that will be happening this spring where we teach some of these integration skills no matter where you are in your career. So you certainly can get more involved with some of what we've been learning as well. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to hit the stop record button. I'm going to then answer some questions if people want to stick around.